We're going to go through this pretty methodically, pretty slowly, and deliberately. If you have questions during the presentation, use the chat screen. And if I need to, I can unmute individuals. But in general, everyone will be muted other than me. And then if we need clarification, I'll unmute individuals as we need to. So I have begun to record this session now, and we're here to talk about hanging protocols and keyboard macros. We'll go through this as deliberately and as methodically as possible. So you see here I have a list of sample studies that I think are appropriate for us to use. And I'm simply going to open a study. And you can see in the top left corner the word stack. That's where, if a hanging protocol is applied, you will see. What that indicates is that I have a stack hanging protocol. For my CR studies, I simply want everything stacked so that as I scroll, I can scroll through the entire study and see one view at a time. Also, what I've done is through my settings, customized settings, and in my profile under layout, I have chosen for every CR study to open in a stack unless I tell it to deliberately do something else. So I created this hanging protocol very simplistically. Clear screen, control, double click on the name at the top of the thumbnails, and I now have stacked every series in the study. When I get the display the way I'd like it to be, I can click Save, give it a name. I can choose whether to have it apply for the single modality or to be able to use it for others as well. So I now have a stack hanging protocol for my CRs. Again, in my settings, customized settings, and layout, I have chosen for that hanging protocol to be applied to every CR. If I check this box that says Use Hanging Protocol Assistant, that means that even though I have told the system in general, open CRs in a stack, when I get to one that I don't want displayed that way, I can create a single hanging protocol for that type study. So you can see stack applied to this second study as well. Simply going to go to the next study in my work list. Now for this particular type of study, I chose to display it differently. It's still a computed radiography study, but all I had to do was simply choose the format in which I wanted those images displayed, put the images where I like them, and then give it a name. Click Save. I called it C-Spine. I want to use it for CRs only, and clicked OK. So you can see that it's very easy to make a simple hanging protocol. And I can set a hanging protocol to affect a type of study unless I tell it to do otherwise. So on my first study, my stack applied. As I scroll through my work list, my stack applied to this type exam as well. And then based on modality, body part, description, and series description, you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner of each of these, we have the series description displayed, and the hanging protocols will hang that series no matter what else goes on. If I tell it to put the cervical right oblique in that corner, that's where it's going to put it when I open that kind of stuff. Same with a chest x-ray. Now I have chosen not to use my stack, even though it's a CR. What I've done in this case is I have done several things. Take a look at my original study. You can see, to make my hanging protocol, I magnified the PA. I flipped the image. And then I gave my protocol a name and saved it so that for chest x-rays, my PA will be in this side, my lateral will be on the other side, my PA will be flipped, and vice versa. Now, I don't need to use anything sophisticated unless I want to. Now, I have my stack hanging protocol, but you'll notice in the top left where I have these hanging protocols described and saved, there are default display mechanisms, and that's all I have to do is simply choose one of the default formats, and if I'm happy with that, the system will remember this type study Dan wants to open in this display format. It's not anything that I created, it's simply a display format that is part of the system. Once I choose it, I can appropriately display whatever type study I want. And if I change my mind, I can choose one of the others. And then the system will remember that's the way I'd like this study displayed. So you can see when I did the chest x-ray, for a single chest x-ray, I rotated the PA. I magnified it, and I just made a simple hanging protocol. Now, this patient happens to have a previous exam. So if I choose to open them together, the system knows the difference whether I've opened a single exam or multiple exams. So I have a hanging protocol that I've created the same way that I created the very simple hanging protocol. I put the two studies side by side, and I linked them so that I can scroll. And as I scroll through one, the other one stays with me. And to create that hanging protocol, I simply chose how many series I wanted displayed on screen. I did Control, double-click on the name. That stacked one series on this side. Control, double-click on the name of the other thumbnail series. That stacked the other study. My linking tool, single click, drag and drop. Now those exams are linked so that as I scroll through one, I scroll through the other. And then I simply save that as a hanging protocol. Pretty straightforward, not very sophisticated, but it can save you a lot of mouse clicks in the course of the day. So we have a stack for CR. Easy enough to create that. As I run across other CR studies, remember in my settings, customize settings, and layout, I chose for CR this hanging protocol to apply unless I told it to do otherwise. So every CR I open, unless I create a specific hanging protocol, it will open in stack. Now for the cervical spine, we created a very simple hanging protocol again. This is not necessarily a way that a radiologist would want to interpret a study. I'm simply demonstrating the flexibility of simple hanging protocols. Single chest x-ray versus multiple studies. Remember when I opened the chest x-ray with the comparison study. Now, this is a pretty good example of a hanging protocol because it contains a lot of variables. And again, you don't want to use the technology to make your life harder. It's just if things are simpler, use the technology. Now, if you look at the study, the localizer on the lateral view was light. They acquired the axial images in 2 different algorithms. And if I choose to, I can just do a simple 4 series and everybody's happy. I can read the exam that way, not a problem. Alternatively, I can choose, put my localizer in here, magnified it. I used a saved window level. I flipped it. I put the axial in one corner, the other axial with a different algorithm in the other corner, double-click my chain link. Now they're linked. All these changes have taken place, and all I have to do is give it a name. And save it. Now I have a new hanging protocol. It can be just as simple as that, or it can be just as complex as that. So we have a 2-series landscape. The system simply opened as many windows as it thought appropriate to display this series. I'm going to show you how easy it is to create a hanging protocol with some complexity that will make your life much more simple. Straight acquisition. Okay, so I'm going to display my axials in 2 windows. I'm going to use a bone window for one, leave the other one at the initial window setting. Want to put my localizer down. I don't want to use a frame for it, but I want it viewed, so I'll stick it down in the corner. So as I scroll through, you can see where those images are. Now I'm going to double-click, link those axial views, and if I choose to save it, and that's how hard it is to make a hanging protocol. We're going to get a little more complex now. Digital mammography is the next big thing. Everyone has, or not many people have, dedicated mammography workstations. eRAD now has a module that one can use, and in that module is included what we call hanging protocol sets. Obviously, the radiologist will choose how they want the images displayed, and they will, rather than dragging images in and out of the viewer to replace the view, what I'll do is I'll create simple hanging protocols, as I did just a minute ago for the other study. But the second step I will take now, I've got my individual hanging protocols, and now I've created not only an individual hanging protocol, but I've created a hanging protocol set so that I have CAD objects turned on, I have MLOs back-to-back, CCs back-to-back, lots of different views. And what I can do with those views is compose them into a hanging protocol set so that I can choose a name for my entire display set, and you can see that I can add and move around the individual hanging protocols that I made, screening CCs back-to-back, turn on the CAD objects, MLOs back-to-back, turn on the CAD, stack them, view them all. Now the next step would be to create a macro so that I don't have to move from one view to the next. I have these new buttons up here. Once I've created a hanging protocol set, I can click the button to go to my next display. Notice that it turned on my CAD. Click the button, go to my MLOs. Click the button, go to my next view with CAD objects turned on. Click the button. Now I simply put, arbitrarily, I just chose display formats, save them as individual hanging protocols, and put them in sequence. So now I stacked my presentation state images next to my clear images so I can see them side by side. Again, totally arbitrary. Whatever the radiologist chooses can be their hanging protocol. Then you can build the set by choosing the individual hanging protocols and adding them, and then I just move from one to the other. So rather than having to go up here and find this button each time, what I've done is I've created a macro so that with a key command, notice my cursor is going to sit right in the middle of the screen, and I'm going to use my arrow key to move to my next hanging protocol set. So all I'm doing is clicking my arrow key, move from set to set, and I can go back and forth because I've created a macro with a key command. Now virtually every task, every button on the screen, you can create a macro or a key command for. For example, I use my up arrow to open my magnification tool. To create a macro, this tool at the top of my screen, the little circle indicates record, start, stop, record, and the double M lets me show you the macros that I've created. I've created one to set a window level to the actual calculated level, set one for magnification, one for next, one for previous. So these can all be used in conjunction with my hanging protocol sets. Create a tool. So let's say I want to do a measurement. I want to begin to record. I want to choose the tool. Now notice my cursor is penciled with the measurement tool. Click pause. Now I'm just going to name this macro, and I'm going to name it measure. And I'm going to choose the button that I want to represent my measuring tool, and I'm just going to do F2. Arbitrary. Virtually any key can impose just about any command. So I'm going to save that. So I can do a measurement. We've had training before on how to do multiple measurements. So I'm going to clear these. And I'm going to go back to my normal cursor. And remember now I'm in the middle of hanging protocols and series of hanging protocols. And now I can use my F2, and now my measurement tool is available to me. I can use my right arrow key and go to my next hanging protocol. So this is probably a good time for me to pause. There's much more to go, but I want to pause, and if anyone wants to type in a question, here's a good opportunity. And if nothing happens in about 30 seconds, I'm going to resume, and then of course at the end we'll circle back around and allow questions. All right. Now speaking of mammography and hanging protocols and hanging protocol sets, we have different vendors that provide different imaging formats. GE, Fuji, Siemens, Hologic, whoever creates your digital mammography can provide it in different DICOM formats, and we can accommodate those. This happens to have R2 as our CAD objects. Just happened to have a study that came from a GE machine, and they use iCAD. So again, I've created a hanging protocol set. Notice there is an asterisk in the front of the name of a set, and there is no asterisk, but I have all these individual hanging protocols that are my prerogative to create, and then once I've created them, I can put them in a set. So I can step through my images. That turned on the CAD objects. There didn't happen to be any findings on those CAD objects. But the point being that we have accommodated now two different styles. If you'll notice, GE sends over a single series. Hologic sends over individual series for each image. So we can accommodate those different styles, and we can display them differently. Now, a very common practice with mammography, of course, is that you will want to see current exam and a prior exam. Now, you can do that a couple of different ways. So I'm going to open Ms. Rock's mammography. And what I haven't shown you yet is our patient folder. This is new with our newest version of software. This patient folder is virtually the same as showing an expanded work list where our relative priors are listed, and we can, of course, open those in advance if you choose. This folder allows me to see all of the previous exams that a patient may have had, and I don't need to open them in advance. I can look at the previous exam, I can read the report from the previous exam, and I can decide if I want to open it. Now remember, I've opened this initial study, used a hanging protocol set for it. Now I want to open into my viewer a second study. So by clicking on the icon in my patient folder, I now have opened the second study. Now the reason this is relevant to hanging protocols is now you'll see the second study, the thumbnails are opened, and I can, as I've always been able to, I can grab these individual images and move them into the viewer. Now I can grab this whole set, can grab the name at the top of the thumbnails for the previous exam. If I drag that into the viewer, now the hanging protocol that I had applied to the original study is now applied to my prior exam, and I can step through those images just like I did the initial study. I still have the option from the work list to select and open both studies at once. Now watch what happens when I open both studies at once. Just like we did for the chest x-ray, we had a hanging protocol for the individual study, but we also wanted to have a hanging protocol if I open a current and a prior. Now obviously for digital mammo, I'm going to want to open the prior almost always. So now what we have, notice in the top left, it's GE Screen Compare. So I have chosen to display the images differently when I open a current exam and a previous exam. Again, you make a simple hanging protocol, put the images where you'd like them, and click Save, give it a name. That's a simple hanging protocol. Then you create a hanging protocol set. Choose however many different individual hanging protocols you'd like. You can add them, you can change sequences, I can put one in, I can take it out, I can move this one so that it happens in front of that one, I can rearrange the sequence of them, I can do all of the above. And then remember, I created a macro so that rather than having to go up here and click the button to change my view, all I have to do is use my arrow key, and I can step back and forth. So I can do combinations of all of these things the way I've always been able to. The big difference now is that series descriptions, even if it's a different type study, I can create a hanging protocol. The system will recognize the difference. This is a GE mammogram, which comes to me in a different format, and I can display it differently than I would the mammogram that came to me from another vendor. So I can create all these things, I can combine them, I can use macros to move among them, I can use macros to open my tools. So I can do all those things. They can all be included in my hanging protocols. Now I'm going to open an MR knee, and this is really a very good example of the difference in how manufacturers create individual studies. There are also differences in how technologists acquire studies. The images may or may not be in the same sequence. So the series descriptions, the study descriptions, all of those things become very important now. If you'll notice, I have this MR knee on Mr. Sims and this MR knee on Ms. Griffin. Notice that I have displayed my series description. I'll make those a little bigger so you can read them. But they're different because the vendor, the manufacturer of the MR scanner is different. So when I open one that was done on this machine, I have a hanging protocol called knee. I've linked my sagittals, I put my axial in this corner, and my coronal over here. And again, this is arbitrary. This is simply the way I chose to display things. Now when I go to open that other MR knee, notice that the images are displayed differently because it's a different manufacturer. The series descriptions are different. So I chose to create my hanging protocol differently, and it says other knee. I simply created a hanging protocol for each type study, and the system knows the difference based on the modality, the body part, the description, the series description. All of those things are taken into account now to create hanging protocols. And one more, I have a final study that I'm going to use to create a sample hanging protocol for you. I'm just going to choose how many series I would like displayed on screen at once. I'm going to put my axials side by side. I'm going to put my coronals side by side, and I'm going to put my sagittals in the corner. I'm going to double-click my chain link so that the system will link automatically any images that are in the same plane. So you can see my coronals and my axials, and I'm just using my sagittal as a landmark down in the corner. Again, totally arbitrary, just the way I chose to display it. All I have to do is click Save, give it a name, click OK. Now I have a hanging protocol for MR brain. And when I open those studies, based on modality, body part description, series description, the images are displayed the way I'd like them to be displayed. So we've only burned about a half an hour, but we've shown some reasonable complexity. We've looked at individual hanging protocols for current and prior exams displayed as opposed to individual exams. The system recognizes the difference. We've done hanging protocol series so that, for example, mammograms, MRs that may have 15 or 16 image series, I can display a group of them, then I can choose to display the next group, and then the next group, and I have these individual hanging protocols, all of which I can build a set from. And then I can use my macro tools while I'm in the middle of those, and in this case, I have a mammo to change window levels. I have one to invoke my magnification tool. I have one to invoke my measurement tool. And these are all keyboard commands so that I don't have to keep going up and selecting a tool, and I don't have to keep dragging in the next set of images. So this is it. This is my time now to stop and ask for questions. And I assume from the absence of typed questions that everyone just understood everything that we did. What I'd like to do is encourage you to contact me directly. My name is Dan Taylor. I'm with eRAD. I will give you my phone number. My direct line is 864-640-8653. Send me an email. My email is D as in dog, Taylor at eRAD.com. dtaylor@erad.com. Send me an email. Give me a phone call. We can hold individual sessions so that we can go further into these tools and apply them for your personal workflow. And I'll be glad to work with anyone. If you're not a current customer, if you're a potential customer, certainly be glad to work with you and look at the possibilities as well.